evening and a very warm welcome along to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News, TV, online and digital radio. And no, I haven't shaved and put on a Geordie accent. It's me, Darren Grimes, in the chair this week as Neil enjoys a well-earned break. Now, this week I'll be asking, is inheritance tax actually a fair tax? And does it actually make as much money for the Treasury as you might expect? And as we're now in the run-up to the general election, we'll discuss whether there's a need for electoral reform to create genuine choice at the ballot box. Plus, with the government suggesting all Britons should have 3 days' worth of tinned food and water, I'll be asking, should we be stockpiling, and if so, what for? All that, plus plenty of discussion with my panellists, the freelance journalist Georgia Gillilly. But first of all, we're going to get an update on the latest news headlines.
Cheers, Darren. Our top stories this hour. 8 people have been taken to hospital after severe turbulence on a Qatar Airways flight from Doha to Dublin. Dublin Airport said emergency services, including airport police and their fire and rescue teams, met the plane as it landed safely shortly before 1 o'clock this afternoon. The injuries to 6 passengers and 6 crew occurred as they were flying over Turkey. Now, the Shadow Chancellor says there'll be no increases to tax or national insurance under a Labour government. Rachel Reeves is promising a tough set of spending rules that she says will grow the economy while keeping taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible. The Conservatives say their current financial plan is working, but Labour is arguing that people feel worse off.
We have economic growth on its knees. We have the decline in living standards, the first time on record where living standards will be lower at the end of the Parliament than they were at the beginning. Debt at almost 100% of GDP and taxes at a 70-year high. So after 5 Prime Ministers, 7 Chancellors, 12 plans for growth, we know that it is time for change.
The proposed return of compulsory national service was rejected by a defence minister just days before the Tories pledged to make it law if the party wins the general election. Andrew Morrison insisted that there were no plans to introduce the policy and said it could damage morale if potentially unwilling recruits were forced to serve. However, as we now know, just 2 days later, Rishi Sunak outlined plans to make all 18-year-olds choose between serving in the army or volunteering in their local communities. Labour has dismissed the Tories' plan as a headline-grabbing gimmick. Ukraine's president is urging leaders of the United States and China to attend a peace summit in Switzerland. President Zelensky is leading the event next month, which aims to unite global opinion on how to stop Russia's invasion and pile pressure on Vladimir Putin. Kyiv says more than 80 countries will be there, but it's not yet clear whether President Biden will choose to attend. It comes after reports suggested Putin was ready to negotiate a ceasefire. More people trust Sir Keir Starmer on matters of national security than the Prime Minister. That's according to a new poll for the Telegraph newspaper. The survey also found that a majority of people are not confident that Britain could defend itself against threats from Russia or China. Meanwhile, almost half believe the next few years will be some of the most dangerous that the country has ever faced. Comes after Rishi Sunak promised to increase Britain's defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. More than 500 migrants have crossed the Channel in small boats so far this bank holiday weekend. Home Office data shows that 227 people crossed illegally from France yesterday. That follows another 288 arrivals on Friday. It brings the total so far this year to nearly 10,400. Fans were left disappointed last night when the rap star that they'd paid to see at the Co-op Live Arena in Manchester was arrested. Video posted to Nicki Minaj's social media shows her being detained in the Netherlands after allegedly trying to take soft drugs through Schiphol Airport. The 41-year-old Starships artist was later released after spending what she said was 5 to 6 hours in a police cell. She told fans outside of her hotel that the show would be rescheduled. The newly unveiled tallest roller coaster in Britain has come to an abrupt stop just a day after it opened. The Hyperia at Thorpe Park in Surrey, said to be the fastest in Britain, features Europe's tallest loop. But in a message posted online, the park said that due to unforeseen circumstances, the new roller coaster will be closed until Wednesday. The rest of the park remains open. And Richard Sherman, whose music inspired generations of children to keep their chin up, has died at the age of 95.
Feed the birds tuppence a bag, tuppence.
Well, along with his brother Robert, he created some of Disney's best-known classics, the duo winning 2 Oscars for their work on the musical Mary Poppins. Other credits include The Jungle Book, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Charlotte's Web. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Right, let's get back to Darren.
Welcome along to the Neil Oliver Show. I'm joined tonight by the journalist and broadcaster Georgia Gillily. Now, Georgia, it's been a quiet old week, hasn't it? Not much going on.
It's been rainy.
It had, yeah. I mean, did you expect him to be as bold and brave as he has been, as in Rishi Sunak, and call an election?
I'm not sure brave's the right word.
Suicidal, is that the right word?
Let's hope not, for him personally. I think he's doing the best he can with his own situation, and I think lots of people were surprised this week, and I think it's because there didn't seem to be any big change this week that would prompt him to do that. But I think at the end of the day, he's just given up because he knows the result is not going to be a good one. And if they wait until November, say, the result may have been worse.
Is there a chance, though, because we saw with Theresa May in 2017, right, she was hailed as the next Iron Lady, you know, the next Maggie. 3 electoral successes Margaret Thatcher had, and we all know how that went for Theresa May. Could the same thing happen to an overconfident Labour Party? Does the Labour Party have to be careful? Because Rishi Sunak's criticism is that no one knows what the Labour Party actually stands for.
I think over the coming weeks we'll see them flesh out their policies more. I still think that people aren't enthusiastic about Labour for many good reasons, myself included. But I think after all of the messes we've endured, and also aside from kind of this or that personal scandal, Partygate, etc., people are very upset about the economy, for example.
Yeah.
The ramifications of COVID, immigration is a huge issue which is not being sorted. Doesn't necessarily mean that Labour has a watertight plan to deal with them, as opposed to the Conservatives. But we've already seen how the Conservative Party has been dealing with it, and it hasn't been dealing with it.
No, I mean, Rishi Sunak was forced to admit, actually, there wouldn't be any Rwanda flights take off before the general election on July 4th. I mean, this is an admission, surely, to his voters, many of them Brexit voters, of failure.
Yeah, absolutely, though. The Rwanda plan is to deal with illegal immigration.
Yeah.
And legal immigration, as we've seen from stats this week, I believe over the past year, net immigration was actually over 1 million in just a year. This is a deliberate policy decision. The small boats crisis is just a small part of that, and that is something the government chose to do.
Yeah, and it wasn't a brilliant look when he was stood there in the pouring rain, absolutely drenched.
No,
through.
and they built that fancy conference room during COVID, didn't they? I don't know why it wasn't done in there. I'm curious to see in the memoirs in 30 years' time who made that decision and why. It was very embarrassing, especially with the blaring music from, is it Steve Bray, the
yes, exactly,
activist?
The EU-mad protester.
You absolutely could not imagine any other European leader or, you know, God forbid, the American president giving an announcement in those kind of conditions. It was really embarrassing, to be honest.
It was making me actually physically cringe. You know, I was sat there sort of watching through my fingers and head in hands. So, you know, it strikes me as odd that any advisor would advise the Prime Minister to go out in those circumstances and actually give this momentous statement, the most important of his entire political career?
It could be that someone thought, oh, you know, if he's standing in the rain and he's kind of putting a brave face on, etc., he'll look as if he's, you know, someone who's able to mount all these challenges. But I think on balance, that's obviously not what happened. Whoever thought that might have been the case made the wrong decision. But, you know, it's not the first kind of PR mishap that's happening in Number 10. There is sort of there's a running joke that his own press advisors kind of want him to lose because there's been so many bizarre mishaps.
Yeah.
But I mean, who knows? Like I said, it's just something that, you know, someone will leak it or they'll write about it in a book in 30 years' time. So we'll wait and see.
Do you think many people have actually made their mind up at this stage because the polling isn't perhaps as solid as you might suspect when Labour are that far ahead in the polls?
I think that people have definitely made their mind up.
You do?
On the majority of them to not vote for the Conservative Party. That doesn't necessarily mean that Labour is ensured, people rolling out the red carpet for them. And yeah, most people who won't vote Tory will sort of just think on balance, okay, I'm voting Labour.
Right.
But I think people have definitely decided they do not support the Conservative Party anymore, and that includes obviously lots of people who lent their vote to them in 2019 and also in 2015.
Well, he's going to need a drink after that, Georgia. If he's watching, he's going to need a drink to get over that
He doesn't drink
analysis.
There, does he?
No, he doesn't actually. I forgot about that. He's teetotal.
He can have a can of Coke.
Anyway, Georgia, thank you very much. We'll be coming back to you for more throughout the show. Now, folks, my first guest on the show is Michael Rudkin, the chair of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. Now, Michael, along with his wife Susan, was wrongly convicted of stealing money. Now, Michael feels they will never properly be compensated for what they had to go through. Michael, absolute pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much for it. You'll have seen much of the coverage over the last few days of Paula Venables, the former CEO of the Post Office, in front of the committee inquiry this week. Have you any sympathy for her whatsoever? There were a few tears shed there.
Well, first of all, just to set the record straight, I'm the former NC chair of the NFSP. But in relation to my feelings towards Paula Venables, given that she'd had plenty of heads up from the Federation during my tenure, most certainly, that there was issues with Horizon.
Yeah.
But she chose not to take heed of that. And having seen the evidence so far in the inquiry, when you get the chairman of the company at that time, which was Moya Green, that ends up putting in text messages, I don't believe you, I've lost confidence in you. When we discover that the CEO actually kept the head of legal affairs, Susan Crichton, outside of meetings, waiting in the corridor like a subordinate, who was a very important part within the organisation to ensure that the post office itself complied with the laws of the land. And it's quite clear that what was happening was Paula Venables had got her own agenda. She wanted to be in the limelight, take all the credit, and it didn't matter how she achieved that.
Michael, she said that she, and I quote, she said she loved the post office and she did the best job and she wanted the post office to thrive for the whole of the United Kingdom. The Sam Stein KC for the prosecution then said actually that was absolute rubbish. Would you concur? Would you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with his assessment. Sam's pretty acute at picking up on these things. Because in general, I can assure you that out of the 11,500 post offices within the network of sub-postmasters, they all love the post office. It's an institution that they love, they worship, and they're proud to be associated with it. But when you've got a CEO who is determined to brandish all of these people as criminals, thieves, it's just absolutely outrageous and unforgivable.
Michael, I'll have a listen to some of what she had to say so viewers get a flavour.
I would just like to say, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this in person, how sorry I am for all that sub-postmasters and their families and others have suffered as a result of all of the matters that the inquiry has been looking into for so long. I will answer the questions truthfully. and I'm very aware that they will be difficult to listen to for you and for me, and I ask your understanding in advance of that.
Now, to be honest with you, Michael, I apologise for showing you that, because it must be enough to turn your stomach, to be perfectly frank. But I mean, is there any part of you whatsoever that believes that there is some form of a, dare I say, Christian forgiveness and a sentiment of apologising that you can accept ever?
Well, no, because purely and simply that successive CEOs have constantly passed the baton on upwards over a period of time, years, with the same institutionalised problems. So sub-postmasters have had to wait 24 years for these kind of apologies, and the latter being the last 12 years where Paula Venables has been in a position where she could do something for sub-postmasters in relation to the Horizon system, because I honestly thought that when she took her position, this would be a new broom that would sweep clean, that would eradicate all these issues.
Yeah.
And she chose to think of her career first and foremost, and was quite happy for sub-postmasters to be prosecuted and in some cases sent to prison.
Michael, just finally then, can I get your take on the Post Office Horizon Offences Act becoming law just today, a final act of this Parliament? What say you on that particular act?
Well, I took a really deep breath this morning, well, yesterday actually, knowing that this was the last-ditched attempt prior to a general election for this actually to be passed through law, so that all these sub-postmasters, all 1,000 who have got convictions, for them now to be vindicated, to have their judgments overturned, and certainly so that as quickly as possible that this information that's on their personal files is eradicated quickly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Michael Rudkin, thank you very much for your company. Now, in studio, folks, Georgia Gillilee still joins me, the freelance journalist. Now, Georgia, I mean, you've been watching some of the events unfold over the past few days. It's been distracted somewhat by the fact that, you know, a general election was announced. But the last act, one of the last acts of this Parliament to pass the Post Office Horizon Offences Act, that's the whole nation sort of breathes a sigh of relief almost for these people and the hell that they've gone through, as highlighted in that very, very powerful drama.
Yeah, absolutely. So I haven't actually got around to watching the drama, but I've also read.
You must. It's so good, actually.
Okay. I'll set some time aside in the future, but it speaks to kind of the uselessness, perhaps, of some of our political arrangements, that it took that really to tell those people's stories to a wider audience. I know there was already actions before that to try and help people. But for some of these people, it's too little too late. People committed suicide, spent years in prison. I mean, I can't imagine being in that position. It would be utterly despairing to have to go through that. And I think we also have a big headline more recently about the infected blood scandal.
Exactly.
I think there are big parallels there, and to do with how
it's failures of the state, isn't it?
Faceless bureaucrats kind of passing the buck, as I guess was saying, from his own experience, passing the buck, no one taking responsibility. It's like, these are real people, real people's lives. Something is wrong, and it's not just to do with the post office, it's not just to do with healthcare, it's to do with a lot of things. I think a lot of change needs to be made. But yeah, obviously it won't be happening within this Parliament because it ends today. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Georgia, thank you very much for that. Now, folks, coming up, I'm going to be taking a look at inheritance tax and asking, is it fair? Is it just? Is it right? You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News. Don't go anywhere.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
2,000 football banning orders have been issued to England fans ahead of this summer's Euro 2024 tournament in Germany. But authorities think that more than 300,000 England supporters could go to Germany, with Scotland fans, of course, also expected to travel in huge numbers. Well, I'm joined now by GBNews' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. So you went to a press briefing this morning. As I understand, the authorities are gearing up to tackle what they see as a huge wave of potential hooliganism at the tournament. What's the latest?
Well, they're certainly not saying they're expecting hooliganism, and they are preparing for the worst, of course, if it happens, but hoping for the best. They say that in recent tournaments, England fans and, of course, Scotland fans have been pretty well behaved, but there will be very significant numbers attending that tournament, which gets underway in just over 5 weeks' time. That first match is Scotland taking on Germany in Munich, and of course just 2 days later it's England against Serbia near Dortmund. So 300,000 England fans alone they're expecting, because it's so accessible. I spoke earlier to Chief Constable Mark Roberts, who is the national lead for football policing. This is what he told me.
Positive, you know, England fans got a great record at recent tournaments. We know when any number of that people travel, there's always potential for issues, but I think the German authorities are really well prepared. And I think one of the positives, particularly thinking about our fans, Germany's a beer drinking culture, so the police are well aware of dealing with people in the nighttime economy. They deal with plenty of big festivals, so I think we're going to a place that is well suited to work with us to keep everyone safe and make sure there's no issues.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very warm welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show with me, Darren Grimes, filling in for the man himself. Now, Anne Robinson, she's a woman that amassed a £50 million fortune as the Queen of Mean on British telly. Just goes to show how being horrible can actually pay. But the TV legend has given it all away to her family, and that's in order, folks, to avoid handing it over to HMRC in the form of inheritance tax. Anne says that she'd rather her children enjoy the money now while she's still alive. So I'm asking the question, is inheritance tax fair? Is it laudable? Is it right? And does it actually generate that much money for the taxpayer? Well, joining me to discuss this is the economist, Catherine McBride. Catherine, a pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much. What's your view? I mean, is inheritance tax actually a big funds raiser for the Treasury? Because it actually causes a fair amount of heartbreak for a lot of families, does it not?
Yes, and it's a very small earner. It made last year less than 1% of all of the money raised by the Treasury. It's terribly unfair. It basically hits London and the southeast more than any other part of the country. In fact, twice as many people in London paid inheritance tax than all of the people who paid it in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland added together. It's very much a tax on London. It's very much a tax on property, because Anne was in a very nice position to have liquid assets that she could give away to her relatives. But most of the people who are hit by this have wealth of between sort of £1 and £2 million, and it's generally tied up with the family house. So in order to give that away, they'd have to kind of find another place to live. So it's really not possible for most people to give away the money. And the uber wealthy people, like sort of the Dukes of Westminster or Northumberland or wherever, they will set up a family trust, which they started doing tens of years ago, you know, in the 50s and the 60s, to get around inheritance tax. So right now, it's just taxing the people who often didn't expect to ever be in that bracket because their house price has gone up so much that they're getting hit by this. But you can't actually sell your house.
Yeah.
You know, you have to live in it. The other option that unfortunately a lot of people are avoiding this by leaving the country.
Yes.
And Bloomberg claims that the UK is the third most popular country to leave if you're wealthy. And we're up there with places like China and Russia. We're the only country that people leave that would be considered a developed Western democracy. So it's pretty embarrassing, really.
Catherine, what would you say to those who say, well, it's immoral for Anne Robinson to do this, right? She made all this money, she's had a good life. It's actually morally correct for the state to say, we're going to take part of your proceedings in life. You've done well, we're going to use it to fund gaps in healthcare and social care and all these other things. And actually, it's the most progressive way, doing it through property, whilst the person is no longer sadly with us.
Well, actually, Anne Robinson is a good case because she actually made the money herself. But inheritance tax, because it comes in a large lump sum, usually, that is money that if people got it themselves rather than giving it to the government, they would invest. So the Growth Commission, has done a lot of studies on this, and it is the most effective way of growing the economy because people actually invest it. You know, if you're going to inherit £100,000 or something, you're unlikely to just go out and blow it all on a big dinner or something. You're going to invest it wisely, or you're going to buy yourself a house. You're going to think of, you know, something to do with it. Where for the Treasury, it's such a small part of the money that they get each year. It's less than 1%. They actually just blow it. They don't invest it wisely because it's not important to them. It's just too small. So it's a very perverse tax, and it discourages people from saving and looking after themselves. If the government's going to just take it, you may as well just spend it.
So then, Catherine,
which, you know, doesn't.
Were, you know, a future government to get in touch with you, Catherine, and they say, come on, Catherine, we're getting you into the Treasury, but you're an economist, we're going to discuss the fairest way to raise revenue for the Treasury. If it's not inheritance tax, what is it? Because we've got to pay for public services somehow, don't we?
Well, except that if you look at how much they've gone up in recent years, we've now got more public servants than we've ever had. And unfortunately, the productivity of our public service has just gone down and down and down. So I'm not, in fact, sure that we should be taking more money to throw it bad. We've got to start managing the public service the way a private company would manage its workforce. We've got far too many people employed without real jobs. And if we actually got rid of inheritance tax and stamp duty, there's a lot of people in the Treasury, that HMRC, that you could get rid of because you don't need them anymore. You know, you also get rid of thousands of pages in the tax code. You know, you could reduce it by taking whole chapters out and putting it in the bin. So we've got to get rid of these little taxes, and there's at least 10 of them that raise very little money, take up a lot of time of the populace. Because HMRC, they have to go and evaluate the assets sometimes, but most of the work improving the value is done by the inheritors, if you like. So you've got to run around, go through your parents' bank accounts, try and work out what everything was worth, get things valued.
Yes, it's a horrible thing.
At the same time as you're organising, and you're also organising the funeral and dealing with, you know, pets and all sorts of stuff that has to go on. So it's a really mean tax.
Yeah,
There's no other word for it.
Catherine.
And it discourages people from building up a capital. The most important thing we need in this country, Darren, is more people with capital. And this is a way for the workers of the country who bought a house, did the right thing in the 60s and the 70s, and paid off their mortgages, worked hard. This is their chance to give something to their relatives.
OK. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much there to the economist, Catherine
It's a pleasure.
McBride.
Always good to talk to you.
Thank you. Now, joining me in the studio still is Georgia Gillilly, the freelance journalist. Now, Georgia, do you have sympathy for Anne Robinson? If you had 50 million in the bank and you had some children, would you be out saying, go wild?
I wouldn't necessarily be saying go wild. You know, if my children were teenagers, for example, I think I'd probably say,
yes,
let's
that would
wait
be
a few
unwise.
years to give them that money until they're a bit more sensible. I agree that she did this.
The right thing, you mean? She did the
yeah,
right thing.
absolutely. And speaking as someone who's self-employed and has to file their own taxes with HMRC every year, any criticism of it, I'm happy to be on side with.
It is a nightmare, isn't
It's really heartbreaking.
And have you ever tried to get hold of them on the phone?
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. So they should be paying me, really.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And what Catherine was saying about our government being inefficient is absolutely true. And I think Anne Robinson's decision is, I think I would applaud it, and I also think it's interesting because we see a lot of celebrities now, very rich people like Mick Jagger, for example, telling journalists that they're not going to leave any money to their children because they think their children should, you know, kind of pull themselves up by the bootstraps, etc. And I think, of course, you want to encourage your own children to be resilient and make their own money and look after their own families. However, I think it kind of goes against the human instinct to not want to help lift up your own children and help them be comfortable, that kind of thing.
All right, Georgia, thank you very much for that input. Now, folks, coming up, as election fury heats up, I'm going to be asking if the electoral system needs reforming to give you at home more choice at the ballot box. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News, hosted by me, Darren Grimes. Don't go anywhere.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead to Bank Holiday Monday, and it's remaining unsettled across the UK with some further showers at times. Reason for the unsettled weather is this area of low pressure. It's going to hang around all weekend and into next week, maintaining this unsettled feel. For the rest of Sunday, still the risk of some further heavy rain, especially across parts of Scotland, but down towards central and eastern parts of England, it will turn drier and clearer. So here, a bit of a chill in the air first thing on Bank Holiday Monday, but elsewhere under the cloud and rain, temperatures holding up above 10 to 11 degrees. So, as I mentioned, some clear skies initially down towards eastern and central England, so some sunshine here first thing in the morning. Further west, we will see some showers, and they will migrate their way eastwards as the day goes on. For Northern England and Northern Ireland, again, a mixture of some cloud and a few bits of brightness, but again, some rain around. Southern Scotland, the risk of some persistent rain still here, with a mixture of bright spells and a few showers further north. But it's in fact across parts of northern Scotland where we do start to see the sunshine heat the ground. We will see some heavy and thundery downpours developing, so watch out for some thunderstorms here as we go through the course of the day. Elsewhere, still the risk of some showers, but they will be fewer and further between compared to Sunday, and also a little bit lighter. But for all of us, it will be a slightly cooler day. I think highs reaching around 16, 17, possibly maybe the odd spot seeing 18 degrees. On to Tuesday, a bright start in the east, but another band of rain will spread in during the course of the day. Turning brighter but showery behind it, but all the time temperatures reaching only at best average. Remaining unsettled on Wednesday and Thursday, but hints of something a bit drier and brighter coming through as we head towards next weekend.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very warm welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show with me, Darren Grimes. Now, Sunak, Starmer, all the rest, they've begun their 6 weeks of campaigning in an attempt to persuade us to give them our vote in the general election. Now, that election has been set for July the 4th. But, folks, I'm asking whether the current electoral system that we have in Britain, first past the post, is actually fair. Let's not forget, UKIP in 2015, millions of votes, one seat. It was 4 million votes for one seat. Is it time for it to be overhauled to offer us more choice? Well, joining me to discuss this further is the political editor of the, formerly of The Express, The Independent now, David Maddox. David, I haven't seen you since you went to The Independent, so congratulations, first of all.
Thanks, Darren.
But actually, where do you stand on this? Because some people say that actually first past the post gives a nation more stability. You tend to get majority governments and therefore they're able to put through an agenda more easily than in Europe, for example, where lots of places have proportional representation, which means more parties, minority parties, have to get together in coalitions to actually form the government. Where do you stand on those two models?
Well, thanks for the congratulations, Darren. That's very kind. Look, I've changed my mind on this. I used to support first past the post for the very reasons you've just given. The stability it gives, the surety of government, and also because, it kept the extremes out of Parliament generally, and maybe you get one or two in there. But now I'm beginning to question it. We've seen a lot of chaos, political chaos in the last few years. We've just been through 3 prime ministers since the last election. So that's hardly a formula for stability. And then, you look at the way this election is really becoming 2 parties fighting over the same ground, largely saying the same things, small differences in rhetoric, but essentially both arguing that they're better managers than the other. There's no real battle of ideas and things. And what is happening is that the parties with the ideas, with the different opinions, whether that's Reform UK or the Greens on the right and the left, are being squeezed out and are being kept out. So, they could get decent amount of seats. The Greens will end up with 2 seats if they're lucky, with loads of votes. Reform may get 1 seat if Lee Anderson holds on to his, but again, with millions of votes, and none of these people will be represented, and I think that's wrong.
Yes. I mean, what do you say then? I guess there's an element here of people feeling a sense of apathy, actually, David. They're saying, I don't want to vote for either of the main political parties, but the ones I do want to vote for don't stand a chance. That creates a sense of disenfranchisement, disenchantment with the ballot box itself. And does that undermine democracy ultimately?
I think it does, and I think this general election could be the all-time lowest turnout for a general election in this country. We already see abysmal turnouts in local elections. If a third of voters come out in local elections, it's it's a victory in its own right. We may be down to about 50% in this general election. I hope it's not that low, but it's exactly this disillusionment.
Yeah.
Who do you want to vote for? Do you only just have a choice between Labour and Conservative, maybe the Liberal Democrats instead of one of those 2 parties? But generally, it's a choice between 2 parties. Whereas if you had a proportional system, there's a much higher incentive to get out there because you can actually vote for the party you want, and that when you're casting the vote, that actually gives them a chance of getting into power, and or at least getting into Parliament.
I'm going to bring in the freelance journalist, Georgia Gillily. Now, Georgia, where do you stand on this? I haven't actually asked your opinion. Where do you stand on... A lot of people say, well, if you had proportional representation, you would lose the constituency element of first past the post and the link between the constituent and the constituency MP. Are you concerned about that, or do you agree with David?
Many of David's concerns I agree with. However, when it comes to supporting proportional representation, it's not something I can bring myself to do, at least not yet. I think, as David was saying, it makes things more chaotic. I mean, look at Israel, for example. Yeah. They have one parliament, one chamber of parliament, and they have proportional representation, and they have all sorts of crackpots at the moment keeping the government afloat among all their issues. I think in the Dutch election recently, it's taken them almost 6 months to try and arrange a government, and I think it empowers extremists. And I think we have so many issues with, as David was saying, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak being very similar, and none of them actually willing to do what people want. I think it shows real failures, but it's not the failures of proportional representation, it's the failures of those political parties. They have no organic support. Very few people are members of them or are going out campaigning for them. They get so much of their funding from, foreign billionaires, that kind of thing. That's the issue, the quality of our politicians and the quality of our political culture and culture in general, which is causing this. It's not really proportional it's not really first past the post, sorry.
Yes. So I assume then David would say to that, look, the fact of the matter is here that there's going to be no competition in politics until we do have this system, because right now political parties are coalitions, but they're too broad a coalition that actually we already de facto have PR anyway, right? Your constituent MP in Hartlepool might have a massively different opinion to a blue wall, for example, Lib Dem facing seat.
It's very different though, because with PR, you're giving people a seat based on percentages of votes and that kind of thing, rather than winning a constituency. And I think people who are more conservative leaning and maybe people who are more on the centre left will regret doing this. And I think we're seeing issues right now, for example, with Islamist extremism. There's kind of a movement to start some kind of Islamist party.
Yeah, religious.
Yeah, which absolutely would get a certain percentage of votes and would therefore maybe have MPs at some point under the system. And I think politicians need to do better, and our culture needs to improve, and our education system and that kind of thing. Everything needs to change. We need root and branch reform, but I just don't think this is the right way. And I think also electoral reform, it's not just about PR. Keir Starmer wants to totally upend the House of Lords and just give us more devolved, useless, unaccountable institutions, and I don't think that's the way to correct our course as a country.
All right, David, you've heard a bit of criticism there. What have you got any thoughts on all of that?
Well, these are arguments that I've used in the past, actually, to argue exactly that case. And but I think, though, I go back to 2016. It always goes back to 2016. With the referendum, and the referendum was a sign really of how disillusioned people were with politics in this country and how they felt that it didn't really represent them. And and I think first past the post is actually quite a crucial part of that, because we have these parties which really just want to be in the centre, just want to say the same things and just want to give this managerial point of view. And we're seeing that, people are rejecting this on both the right and the left. And, they don't feel that their opinions are being addressed at all. And this is, I think it's time for change. I mean, the House of Lords was mentioned there. Why not get rid of the House of Lords and replace that with a chamber with PR, keep first past the post in the Commons, and have a House of Lords based on PR. Of course, there's lots of different systems of PR as well. You don't have to go for the pure party list system. You could go for a much more regional-based system. We've got versions in Scotland and Wales. We can be imaginative with it, and it's. I think the time has come for change.
All right. Well, David, very interesting stuff there. That's the political editor of The Independent, David Maddox. And before that, it was the freelance journalist, Georgia Gillily. Now, folks, the government has said Britons should have 3 days' worth of tinned food and water. Is this really necessary? What should we be preparing for? We'll be discussing that after the break. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News, hosted by me, Darren Grimes. Don't go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
He's meeting his father, the King, for just the second time since his father's cancer diagnosis. Harry's going to an Invictus Games gig at St Paul's on Wednesday, and his father is hosting a garden party at Buckingham Palace. Once they're all said and done, about 7 p.m, they are going to meet, apparently.
Yeah,
but
wonderful.
Crucially not the Princess of Wales.
Well, I think it's a wonderful story, and obviously you would. If you're visiting the country, you haven't seen your dad and he's ill with cancer, of course you would go grab a Costa. I can't wait to see the pictures of them in Costa together, just having a little catch-up.
Do you think they might embrace?
I would hope so, but...
Do you know, I think it's really important that life's too short not to have a relationship with your family. I know too many people that aren't speaking, or they're falling out because of money or whatever, and we're only on this earth for a very short time, and what a shame not to have a relationship with your own
haven't they?
son.
I mean, it's the trust issue that is really the problem here, and straight after this they're going to be heading off to Nigeria, and they're still involved in all of these sort of like commercial and media activities. If you don't have that trust there with your family, and you're responsible for breaking that trust down, it's not really, it's sort of on you, isn't it?
It's still mendable, though, I think, and we've all got people in our family that maybe we wouldn't trust with our bank details or something like that, so they can just not... You know, Charles shouldn't be going to Harry, guess what, you can't tell anyone. He's like, that's not what they're going to talk about, are they? They're not going to tell him anything.
The King is his father, but it's different, isn't it, if it's your brother, it's your sibling, whereas a father's probably perhaps more likely to be forgiving and to be wanting to sort of reunite. Do you think maybe it's going to be harder for him to mend that relationship with William and Catherine?
I think it's really, really hard. I mean, I can't see how they can... But they need to get in a room together. They need to speak. The only way that you are going to break down barriers when it comes to relationships is by facing it and speaking about it.
You say life's too short, but some would say, well, that's the perfect reason not to tolerate any nonsense.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show with me, Darren Grimes. Now, wind-up torches, tinned meat and bottles of water, they're just some of the items that the government are advising people to stock up on as it urges the public to prepare for emergencies. Scouts Honour, be prepared. A new website called Prepare has been launched by the government to advise the public on what steps they can put in place in case of a variety of emergencies. Now, is this necessary, folks, or is this yet again more scaremongering from the government? Well, joining me to discuss this further is the author and journalist Julie Cook. Julie, thank you very much for your time today. Now, Julie, I'm looking at some of the items there, and it says you need a penknife. Now, I've never used a penknife in my life, to be quite honest with you. I wouldn't know where to start. So, are they just on a hiding to nothing here?
Well, hi, Darren. First of all, I think
you know, they said don't stockpile, don't panic buy. But the first thing people are going to do when they hear this kind of advice is to go and panic buy. And you know, lots of things go through your head. Is it the war? Is it the threat of nuclear war from Russia? Is it the Ukraine disaster? Is it what's happening in Palestine and Israel? There's so much going on in the world to make us afraid. But is it really that, or is it more about compliance and kind of Project Fear Mark II? And I'm veering more towards that. I'm thinking, you know, there's a general election called exactly the same time. And if there's any way to make the public behave and comply, it's to make them afraid.
Yes, I mean, we have gone through years of a mission creep, I guess, by successive governments into a more liberal sphere. I mean, is this part of a wider agenda, or do you think this is just common sense? And as I say, Scouts on a be prepared. You know, I was taught that as a kid. Is it not just common sense and wise to actually prepare for all scenarios?
I think it's common sense. I think, you know, most of us do have a few batteries in the cupboard or a candle or, you know, a tin opener, for example. I think they are common sense. But I think by making a Be Prepared website and announcing it at the exact same time as a general election it's so much more than that. Yes, let's be prepared, but there's something else going on here. And it seems to me that general underlying sense of unease, anxiety that kind of keeps us compliant.
Yeah, I mean, the logo that we've just had on screen there, for those that may be listening on radio, how would you prepare in massive letters, you know, that capital bolding, really like emphasising that word prepare. You know, it reminds me a bit of George Orwell, dare I say. You know, it might as well say Big Brother says, how would you prepare for an emergency? Am I going too far?
No, I don't think you are. And I think, as I said, Project Fear 2, we've all lived through all of this with 2020 and the pandemic. And interestingly, in which we were told not to panic buy and stockpile when we kind of needed to. And now that there is no immediate defined threat, as I said, there are lots of threats, but nothing defined, we're told, right, go and get all this stuff. And, you know, I think people have just had enough of being spoken down to and told to do the obvious. But equally, as I say, the timing doesn't escape most people's notice, with Rishi Sunak announcing this snap general election in July, which, you know, has shaken everybody. To have this at the same time, as you say, with the big logo, the big website, it's fishy to me, Darren. It's fishy.
Well, fishy Rishi, that's what some people are calling him, Julie. But I mean, surely though, after the pandemic, right? Do you remember when everyone was rushing out of the shops and the shops were bare because people were stockpiling all sorts of loo roll? There were shortages of loo roll, and the loo roll companies, manufacturers, had to say, "Hang on a minute, we're not running out of loo roll. Calm down." But actually, to avoid scenarios like that, you know, is this just natural preparedness for eventualities that may arise? I mean, goodness only knows what could happen, but all eventualities ought to be considered, especially if you're, for example, someone with a young family.
Yes, of course. As I say, you know, common sense. But most of us do have common sense. I think there's a sense of being talked down to a little bit, you know, having some tins in the cupboard, having a tin opener, having some batteries and a torch. I'd say pretty much most of us have a few of those items anyway. But what interested me was it was the 3 days worth of food. And I think that's what's got people talking and panicking, because it's kind of like, well, if there's a nuclear disaster, it doesn't matter whether you've got 3 days or 30 days, you know, it's game over, frankly. But if it's any other kind of disaster, I don't know, flooding, electricity problems, whatever, I mean, really, is 3 days of tins the answer? I think we live in such a sophisticated society now that's so dependent on technology, internet, phone. You know, for example, you mentioned the wind-up radio. Well, how are we going to get the radio now that pretty much all of radio is digital anyway? You know, they have the juice to get their programs out for us to get to. So, yes, it all just seems very obvious common sense, and yet there's no real defined threat of what it is we're meant to be prepared for. And I think that's what's getting people anxious.
All right, Julie, there, thank you very much for that analysis on the preparedness that the government is shouting in capital letters. Julie Cook there. Now, we're going to read out a statement from His Majesty's government who say this. The information on this site is designed to help you prepare for emergencies, be more informed about hazards and get involved in activities to support yourself and your community before, during and after an emergency. There's also specific advice for disabled persons and carers. Taking action now will make it easier to manage if an emergency does happen. Well, what say you at home? Do you actually view this as yet more scaremongering, or do you think actually, calm down, Darren, you're being a bit conspiratorial? We'll see what Georgia Gillenly thinks so, as well, the freelance journalist who still joins me in the studio. When you were reading all of this, because we're being told to print out a list of numbers.
I've not printed out.
Have you printed off a list of numbers? Did you dash and say, well, my phone might die of battery, so all these other things might happen? Preparing for all eventualities. Have you done it?
No, I think if I, had children or something, I think it'd be something that was more at the front of my mind. I agree that governments instilling fear in people makes people more compliant, which can be useful for governments. However, our current government, I don't think they could organise a proverbial in a brewery. I don't think it's coordinated that this was released, and there's also a general election. I don't think it's coordinated at all. There's no evidence of that. I think, to an extent, it can be seen as patronising, but I also think that, as we're saying, with things being so digital now, you're saying, oh, most people might have a torch in their house. I don't actually have that. I just use my phone.
To be honest,
so many
Georgia,
things.
The amount of people that couldn't afford to get 3 days of supplies on top of their weekly shop.
Yeah, that's a lot, actually. I probably have maybe not even a day or something, depending. But, yeah, I think people who may be a bit older, they have their own houses. When you have a house, things just accumulate. Like my parents' house, for example.
Absolutely.
We have
the
stuff,
space, the space.
If you're living in a flat in London, you're a young person.
Exactly.
You don't just have loads of kind of emergency things or lots of food, that kind of thing. I think the government might be aware that people sort of our age are a bit less prepared for
And
things,
a lot of people may well be saying this proves that they're all a bit out of touch, to be perfectly honest. But Georgia, thank you very much for your company today. That's freelance journalist there, Georgia Gillenly. Now, folks, that's it from me for this week on telly. But for more chats about the dangers of artificial intelligence, please do go online to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News. I'll see you there.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in the big story, were Nigel Farage's comments on Sky News about some Brits not sharing our values Islamophobic? We'll hear from both sides. In my take at 10, I'll be dealing with shocking allegations about one of the professional dancers on BBC's Strictly. Plus, royal author Angela Levin on a big new headache for Meghan Markle. We're live at 9.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Are the newspapers getting